Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so glad you've joined me for today's story. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and I hope you're going to get yourself that lovely drink because you deserve to spoil yourself. So let's get started, shall we? Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Sheila Morris felt a huge buzz of excitement when she entered the department store. Her heart began to pound in her chest very, very loudly, so much so that she could hear every single beat. This was not the sound of fear that she was hearing, but the sound of nervous exhilaration, when you're about to do something incredibly thrilling, but very scary at the same time. Like when you jump out of an aeroplane from a vast height with a parachute, or you bungee jump from a high mountainous elevation to the valley below. She felt that addictive surging spike of adrenaline literally pulsating through every single cell of her body, and the feel-good hormones like dopamine and serotonin, bringing her feelings of great euphoria that made her feel both vital and extremely alive. Sheila was predictably immaculately dressed, which wasn't unusual for her, for she was extremely particular about how she presented herself to the world, and believed emphatically that you never ever got a second chance to make a first impression. So looking great at all times was a prerequisite in her life as far as she was concerned, and even when she retired to bed at night, she made absolutely sure she put on a touch of lipstick, so that should some unforeseen event arise in the middle of the night that would require her to make an appearance, that she would invariably look good, and that was significantly important to her. On this prepossessing summer's morning, Sheila was wearing her expensive designer navy blue chinos that flattered her narrow waist and long, slender legs. She also sported a well-tailored red leather jacket that looked remarkably good with everything she wore, and over her shoulders she was wearing a stunning-looking Louis Vuitton designer bag. For Sheila would never ever own a purse that wasn't designer. That would be a blight to her wardrobe. At a brief glance, no one would suspect that such a glamorous, well-spoken woman of substantial means, such as Sheila Morris, to be harbouring such a dirty secret as she was now. For indeed there were many skeletons lying buried in Sheila's closet that if her husband knew about, it would make her feel decidedly ashamed. Sheila was one of the well-to-do in society, who mixed in the right social circles and said the right things at parties, where she mixed with some of society's most elite. Sheila had come from an extremely privileged background, with wealthy affluent parents who had made all their money from pharmaceuticals. Growing up, she had attended very expensive private schools as a girl in Washington state, and her parents had given her her heart's desires, most especially her doting father, for Sheila only had to look at her father through adoring eyes, flash her eyelashes a little and say, "Please, Daddy," and he would refuse her nothing. So growing up she had been somewhat precocious and extremely spoilt. Sheila currently lived in a beautiful part of Washington state, in a smart, state-of-the-art bungalow that she and her husband had designed for themselves by an esteemed up-and-coming architect. Sheila drove a top-of-the-range Land Rover, had a bulging bank balance, and was married to a highly esteemed barrister. She had an 11-year-old daughter called Lily, who went to a very expensive private school like she had done as a child. Ostensibly with Sheila Morris's very blessed, affluent lifestyle, you wouldn't believe that a woman who wanted for absolutely nothing and could afford high-end, very grandiose overseas holidays every year, where she'd visit fabulous places like Monaco or enjoy exclusive skiing holidays in the Swiss Alps, would be capable of doing what she was about to do now. But not everything you see with your naked eye is what it seems, despite what you may have been led to believe. And this was certainly the case for Sheila Morris, who wore innocence on her face like little Bambi in the movies, and her glamorous lifestyle spoke of a woman who was both dignified and elegant, who would do nothing that would ever sully her unblemished reputation. But you would be wrong about all of that. Sheila Morris couldn't help herself. Since she'd been a little girl, she'd got a thrill from stealing things at every given opportunity, The truth was she didn't really want the things she stole, but it was the stealing itself that made her somewhat come alive inside. She knew, of course, what she was doing was intrinsically wrong, and would have absolutely appalled and disgusted her husband Vince, if he had known about it at all, that is. But it would seem her slippery hands were more nimble than quicksand, along with the still small voice in her head that urged her please not to do it. As far as Sheila was concerned, that nagging, irritating voice inside her that reprimanded some of the things she chose to do, with a silent, urgent conviction, should be ignored at all times. How perfectly dull it would be to live life so obediently, sticking by the rules all the time so stringently. For Sheila, listening to that wizened voice inside her that served her greatest good, found that utterly boring, and it would certainly make her plush life become desperately mundane. For Sheila Morris, stealing was like playing the most artful game, for there was always a possibility that you could get caught, and that thought in itself was incredibly thrilling. Sheila loved living on the edge, doing things she knew she ought not be doing. Even as a young child, she had loved stealing things from her own mother, and seeing her mother going absolutely frantic as she looked aimlessly for the object that she was missing, wondering where on earth it had got to, for things just didn't vanish into thin air in front of you. Or did they? Sheila would delightfully watch her mother, who believed she was going completely mad, for she would search frantically in every nook and cranny of their Queen Anne house that they lived in at the time for the missing object in question. Sheila's mother soon resigned herself to the fact that things went missing in their household very mysteriously, for reasons she couldn't understand. She had no way of knowing, of course, that Sheila, her own daughter, was behind these bizarre, enigmatic disappearances, as shoeboxes of her mother's missing things were clandestinely stashed and stored away in the back of her wardrobe, far away from her mother's keen eyes. Sheila would sometimes make objects that had gone missing for months on end reappear in the most bizarre, peculiar places, for that was all part of the thrill of this lovely game. Ostensibly, Sheila's mother was confounded to find the brooch she'd been missing for ages, lying among the canned peaches she'd canned the previous year. Then she also found the slippers she'd been missing, neatly folded up in a towel and placed in an old sports bag that she hadn't seen for a long time. Then there were 3 of her favourite lipsticks lying together in an envelope in her desk. Sheila's mother had been so perturbed by these bizarre events concerning things that went missing, that suddenly made a reappearance again, that she'd come to the firm conclusion that something outer-worldly was going on in their household. Either that, or she really was losing her mind. Sheila's mother brought a well-renowned psychic medium around to their house. She had been convinced that a ghost was stealing her things and putting them back in bizarre places. Sheila's mother knew that the elderly couple who'd lived in the Queen Anne house before they'd purchased it had both passed away on the premises, for she had reason to believe that possibly their spirits were messing around with her. Maybe it was a game for them to make all these disappearances happen, or perhaps it represented something infinitely more menacing and insidious. She couldn't be sure about that. It occurred to her that maybe they even wanted her out of their house, because perhaps they still believed in death, that the house belonged to them. The psychic medium that Sheila's mother had invited over to the house was called Miriam Fenter. She told Sheila in no uncertain terms that the previous couple, who had died in the house, were definitely not haunting the place, for she could not pick up on their deceased energy. "If they were still around, I would know about it. No, there is nothing in your house, I can assure you of that." Of course, this had come as a relief to Sheila's mother. But then at the same time, if these things that were going missing had nothing to do with a ghost, then why were they disappearing? Could she be losing her mind? And she certainly didn't want to entertain that thought. Miriam Fenter claimed that she had never felt any paranormal energy in the household at all, which mystified Sheila's mother all the more. If the ghosts of the previous occupants were not messing around with her, then who was? It never occurred to Sheila's mother that her daughter was pulling her own strings like a puppet, and getting a great deal of entertainment and pleasure from doing so in the process. Sheila had thoroughly enjoyed observing her mother's utter confoundment, and privately giggled about it all, especially when her mother suddenly came to the conclusion that if things weren't being moved around by a ghost, maybe the problem really did rest with her, and perhaps she was growing increasingly absent-minded and misplacing things all the time, putting them in the oddest of places. Sheila's father had told his wife that no, of course she wasn't going mad, and that being absent-minded from time to time was not a big deal at all. But his reassuring words did little to comfort Sheila's mother, who thought that she was going mad, until one day Sheila left home, and things no longer began to disappear like they had done in the past. But even so, Sheila's mother never put two and two together to make four. She never connected the dots. For some incongruous, unfathomable, rather paradoxical reason, Sheila felt empowered when she took things from people that did not belong to her, especially when it left those people confused, bewildered, and confounded. When Sheila Morris attended church with her husband Vince seated at her side, and the pastor began to preach about the importance of integrity in front of a large congregation of people, Sheila would inwardly physically squirm, sitting there rather uncomfortably in her seat, looking the picture of innocence, on the outside of course, as she sat there with her Bible wide open on her lap, while her spirit would be fiercely convicted of all the duplicitous things she had done. It would seem the things she had stolen over the years from department stores and various friends' houses would rudely flash in her head, rather like a slideshow. It was in those moments of great conviction when Sheila's guilty conscience was severely pricked, and then she would say to herself very sternly, "I'm never going to steal ever again. It's over from now. I'm a person of great integrity, and I have no intention of taking things that don't belong to me." And in those moments, she really meant every word of it. But some addictive behaviours are almost impossible to shake off. By all accounts, when Monday morning arrived, like a brand new artist's slate that needed to be painted, Sheila would find the urge to steal had become like an overwhelming, insatiable itch that she was desperate to scratch, and nothing could stop her from doing so. Sheila was not so skilled or proficient at thieving that she'd never ever been caught. Indeed, she'd had her moments when things had been touch and go for a while. On one occasion she'd been caught red-handed by the security in a store. But over the years Sheila had astutely learned from her grievous mistakes. She had become even more sneaky at what she did, so it was rare for her to get caught. But there were moments when fate didn't always deal her the best hand of cards, and she had to find her way to wiggle out of difficult situations to ensure that she didn't end up with a criminal conviction. For certainly if that happened, she very much doubted that her noble husband Vince, a man of great substance and character, would ever talk to her again. On one occasion Sheila had been standing over a large basket of expensive designer jewellery that had been stashed together, as all the items in question were marked with 50% off the original marked price. Sheila had been examining the jewellery, pretending to admire it in the mirror, as she tried on countless necklaces and bangles. She enjoyed playing the role of an interested customer, looking for a good deal. Indeed, the whole charade she'd pull off in the store was part of a clever, cunning, deceptive stage act that Sheila employed whenever she went shoplifting. Sheila loved it when she had an audience, which could be a security guard occasionally skimming his eyes over her, or possibly a shop assistant glancing at her from time to time, to see if his or her customer might possibly need help, never suspecting for a single moment that this affluent customer, who looked as if she might actually drive a Rolls-Royce, was up to no good. For Sheila, any eyes that might be watching her added to all the excitement, and made the act of slipping an item in her bag very sneakily all the more titillating, because she needed to be so sleight of hand that no one would know she'd actually stolen the item, and being that quick with the fingers was an art form as far as Sheila was concerned, and she was good at what she did, for she'd been pinching things for a very long time, and had learnt some hard and fast lessons that appeared to have served her well. This was an unassuming day, just like any other, but it was a day that Sheila was not likely to forget, as she examined all the strings of colourful jewellery in the basket at the store. Sheila had seen a security guard watching her. She had looked up at him and innocently flashed him a warm smile. He had quickly looked away, his skin flushing a bright pink colour for he was a tad embarrassed. For even the security guard does not want to be caught watching you, or be seen to observing you, for that makes him seem less professional and more obvious. When Sheila thought the security guard had all but looked away from her, for a brief, vital second, after she had coquettishly flashed him a dazzling, rather flirtatious smile that had made him conspicuously blush, Sheila thought she had him by the short and curlies. Now was the ideal moment to strike, while the iron was very hot. She took that sizzling, beautiful second to drop a bundle of jewellery into her wide-open purse, which she did with a stylish air of nonchalance, and then steadily marched down the escalator with her elegant deportment, head held high and shoulders right back. Sheila was about to exit the shop, wearing an expression of perfect innocence on her made-up face, but alas, she had been apprehended by the security guard she had seen earlier, who had been watching her very intently, more intently than Sheila had initially realized. He was obviously perceptively astute, very accomplished at his job, and Sheila had completely underestimated him. The security guard marched deliberately towards her, wearing an arrogant, rather stern, no-nonsense expression on his face, with a kind of "I gotcha" look that suggested he had not been fooled by Sheila's artful shenanigans for a single second, and knew the cunning schemes women like herself employed in order to get away with their guileful acts. Sheila could see that the security guard looked somewhat smug, rather self-important, as if he was in the act of self-congratulating himself for being so quick to spot Sheila's sleight of hand, and was clearly thrilled to have caught her in the act of stealing. "Ma'am," he said, "will you please come with me?" "Why must I come with you?" Sheila had demanded to know, glaring at the security guard impertinently. She accentuated the posh, privileged trill of her voice, for this had served her well over the years, for it often made people doubt themselves, and she hoped sincerely it would intimidate the security guard, because of course someone coming from her privileged, affluent background, who spoke the Queen's English almost with perfection, with a distinct plum in her mouth, couldn't possibly be accused of stealing. I mean, the idea was ludicrously insane, was it not? "Ma'am, I believe that you have taken some jewellery, and you have it in your purse. It doesn't belong to you," said the security guard very soberly. "I need you to come with me right now. You have committed a criminal offence, for you have taken property that does not belong to you, without purchasing it first." Sheila had looked at the security guard with a condescending air of superiority. "Goodness gracious me! You think I stole something? Is that what you're trying to imply? Good grief! I'd never do something like that. I could take you to court, young man. Sue you for defamation of character. I'm a woman of high moral standing, I'll have you know, who would never demean myself by doing something like that. Stealing is completely beneath me." The security guard did not look remotely intimidated by Sheila's unambiguous threats, but insisted she followed him to the manager's office at once. And so it was, with her tail between her legs, Sheila had followed the security guard to the back of the store, up a long flight of terracotta-coloured steps, into a little office which contained a couple of ugly-looking filing cabinets, a poky desk, with a couple of flimsy chairs that looked like they belonged in a yard shed rather than in an office. There was a calendar of American garden birds on the wall, which looked as if it was long since out of date, and appeared to be warping and buckling up at the sides, as no one had replaced the calendar for several years. The pale buttercup-coloured room had a stale scent of old cigarettes, and the desk was meticulously tidy, as if whoever owned it had a touch of what Sheila would describe as OCD, for everything on the desk, from the pencils to books, was stashed in such straight lines that Sheila wanted to mess up the desk a little, because it was far too ordered for her. Sheila was told to take a seat on the hard-looking, uncomfortable chair with wobbly legs that would unlikely have supported a woman of large stature or size without breaking or falling apart. So it was a good job that Sheila was slim, although she was secretly wishing she wasn't at this particular moment in time, for it would have given her a great deal of pleasure to break the chair and hand the broken parts back to the manager, accusing him of endangering her safety by allowing her to sit on such a flimsy piece of furniture, and sue the pants off the store as a result. The security guard had stood in the doorway, watching her for a long while he waited for the manager to arrive, and then he promptly left, after the manager entered and he'd exchanged a few muted words with him that Sheila had not heard, but she could easily guess what they were saying about her. She could see the security guard looked all puffed up with his self-importance, as it appeared as if he was being congratulated by the manager for being so sharp and observant on the job. Sheila had heard the security guard mumble under his breath, "It's my job, sir. It's what I do. I'm highly observant. I know her kind only too well." It was very clear to Sheila that earlier on, when the security guard had initially apprehended her, he had been talking to the manager at some length on a walkie-talkie system, so no doubt the manager had been fully informed about what Sheila had done, and all about the grubby jewellery she had pilferaged from the store that was now lying in her purse. Sheila had sat at the desk, her back as straight as a pencil, her deportment as intimidating and self-assured as possible, before the manager had finally arrived. In truth, every long-winded second had seemed like a lifetime to Sheila Morris, for the hands of time stood perfectly still. The small office had become almost insufferable for her, for Sheila hated and abhorred small, confined spaces that made her feel decidedly trapped. She was tempted to get the hell out of the place, run down the staircase, and right out of the store, but she didn't want to cause a scene, so she remained dutifully anchored to a rather rickety office chair, all the while her feet, that were very clammy, were sweating profusively in her court shoes and tapped the floor rather nervously. Her heart raced a dime to a dozen. Sheila seriously feared the repercussions of anyone finding out about what she had done, most especially her husband Vince, as reputation in Sheila's elite world was absolutely everything, especially in the circles she mixed in. If word got out that she was a thief, well, Sheila couldn't imagine how she'd cope with that, and how people would react to that information. Luckily for Sheila Morris, the manager had been all but putty in her hands, persuadably malleable, you could say. Sheila had known how to manipulate him, with a mastery that was very calculating but proficient, for Sheila was very good at reading people's body language and figuring out what exactly made them tick. The manager was a slightly rounded man, possibly in his early 30s or so, with a slight overhang of the belly, probably caused by lack of exercise. He had a moustache and wore round spectacles on his eyes. He sat down opposite Sheila, and she was surprised the chair supported his weight, but one of these days she was certain he'd break the thing. The manager's brown eyes were flecked with green around the iris area, and they were fixed steadily on her. "Ma'am, will you please open your purse for me?" he had said. "My security guard has reported to me that you are carrying stuff on your person that does not belong to you, and is the property of the store." Sheila shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and then obliged the manager's request by pulling out a tangle of costume jewellery, none of it that she would have ever worn, as Sheila thought it was both cheap, tacky and extremely vulgar, but it had been fun to steal, until she had got caught, that is, for she had not anticipated that happening on this very benign Monday morning. The jewellery was lying across the table, along with other supercilious items of Sheila's that included dark glasses, a wallet, some lipstick, a notebook, a chewed-up pen, along with cough lozenges and a few tissues. "Goodness gracious me!" Sheila said, feigning surprise, as the jewellery spilled out onto the desk, making a clanking sound and a decided mess. Sheila's eyes widened as she pretended to be nonplussed by the jewellery in her purse, that was now spread across the desk in full view of the manager, who regarded the jewellery with an expression of great distaste. Sheila suddenly realised the manager was the one who owned the desk, and obviously suffered from OCD. So the jewellery he was seeing that was thrown around the place indiscriminately was making him visibly squirm, and Sheila inwardly smiled as he arranged the jewellery on the table in a straight line, and once he'd done this, his heart rate appeared to slow down, and his breathing became more comfortable. Sheila looked up at the manager, with two burgeoning frown lines developing between her brows. "How odd!" she said. "I can't think where all this costume jewellery came from, or how it got into my purse in the first place. I do recall looking at it in the baskets that was for sale.
It was going for half price, you know, but so dreadfully tasteless and vulgar it is. I had no interest in it at all. I mean, who on earth would buy stuff like this? I'm not surprised it's going for half price. I'd never ever wear anything this tasteless. I personally like to buy my jewellery from a real jewellery store. I don't appreciate or even like fake stuff of any kind. I can't imagine how on earth it got into my purse like this. Maybe without thinking I put it there. I had other things on my mind, you see. I do tend to get easily distracted. That's what must have happened here. But I would never ever willingly steal anything. I'm a very wealthy woman, you know. I could afford to buy much better jewellery for myself than this. My husband is a barrister. If I was to take something, credit me with some taste, would you? This jewellery is so cheap-looking, I'd never buy it. I'm telling you, I do not know how it got into my purse. Maybe someone other than myself put it there, just to get me into trouble. There's some weird people out there, you know. Ma'am, my security guard caught you putting this jewellery in your bag. He saw you do it himself with his own eyes. He said you did it very sneakily and very quickly. You did it with deliberate intent. You are being caught stealing, ma'am, and in this store we take such unacceptable behaviour very seriously indeed. We do not tolerate shoplifting of any kind. Under the circumstances, we have a zero-tolerance policy towards it. I'm going to have to call the police, who will take you to the police station, where you will be charged and have your fingerprints taken. The manager was so prim and proper, Sheila couldn't help thinking to herself, he was one of those dreadfully dull men that abided by all the rules in everything he did. She imagined that when he was a schoolboy, he'd likely have been the teacher's pet, completely incapable of being seen to do anything wrong. And yet despite the manager's goody-two-shoes veneer that he showed to the world, Sheila Morris was convinced even he was capable of being manipulated. The manager pulled out his cell phone to call the police, and Sheila put her perfectly manicured hand on his arm to stop him. "Oh, but you don't want to do that," Sheila said persuasively, pulling out a leather wallet from her purse, which she had replaced after she'd emptied it out on the table. She pulled out a couple of $1,000 from the wallet in cash, hurriedly placing them in the manager's hands. At first the manager's eyes had bulged open in surprise. His moustache had twitched rather nervously. Sheila could see he liked the look of all that money, and enjoyed the feeling of having $2,000 of cash placed in his hand, and she knew when people held money in their hands, they were often reluctant to part with it. "Are you married, Mr. Lambert, by any chance?" Sheila asked, looking at the badge on his lapel to affirm his name. People always felt incredibly important when you addressed them by their name. The personalization always had a softening effect on people, making them a whole lot more malleable and more kindly disposed towards you. "I've got a girlfriend," the manager muttered. "But what has that got to do with you, ma'am? I don't bring my personal life to the office." "But of course you don't. Well, I'm not surprised you've got a girlfriend, Mr. Lambert," said Sheila coquettishly, ignoring his innuendos. "I mean, a good-looking man such as yourself, Mr. Lambert, would easily be snapped up by so many women. You're very attractive, so your girlfriend is very lucky to have you, if you don't mind my saying so. You're a very debonair, well-polished man. Anyone can see that. Oh, can you imagine, Mr. Lambert, what you could do with the money that I've put in your hand? Your girlfriend would appreciate being taken out somewhere special for dinner. And imagine if you bought her something beautiful. She'd be so appreciative of that. It would mean a lot to her if you spoilt her like that." Sheila leaned forward on the desk, her eyes now meeting Mr. Lambert's. She could see the hardness on his face was melting away, rather like chocolate in a cast-iron griddle. Her words appeared to be breaking down the fortress he had put up between them. "Mr. Lambert, no one need know about this little transaction between us," said Sheila Morris, pointing a manicured finger at the stash of notes in the manager's hand, that he appeared to still be holding, rather stiffly at that. "Let's just say, Mr. Lambert, this will be our little secret. If you take the money from me, then you can't call the police. It's a fair deal, don't you think? I never wanted the jewellery anyway. It was all just a game to me. The only pity is that I got caught. But it happens sometimes, doesn't it? It's just one of those unfortunate things. Are you bribing me, ma'am? Asked the manager, raising a cynical brow behind his round spectacles that made his eyes appear all the more round. Absolutely I'm bribing you, said Sheila Morris shamelessly. I mean, this is a win-win situation for the both of us, is it not? You get something generous for pretending that none of this happened, and then you can spoil your girlfriend. Very well. We've got a deal, said the manager. It's our secret, and it must stay that way. I will admit my girlfriend would appreciate a slap-up meal somewhere, and a little pampering. But this can't happen again. Do you understand? Sheila Morris coquettishly purred like a cat. Of course I understand, Mr. Lambert. You're a very good man, and your girlfriend is very lucky to have you. I'm glad you've seen sense, Mr. Lambert. And of course, I assure you, this will never happen again, not in your store. The manager had promptly put the money in his jacket pocket, but his voice became firm and authoritative. You've been warned, man. You're very lucky I'm not going to call the police to have you prosecuted, which I should have done. But I will let you off just this once, given I'm a reasonable man. But I must ask you to leave the premises forthwith. Sheila had happily obliged him, once again feeling a sense of empowerment at having been able to bribe herself out of a rather sticky, precarious situation. But it had been touch and go for a short moment. Thank God the manager had been easily bribed, as the last thing Sheila needed was a criminal record, or for her 17-year-old marriage to go up in a pile of smoke. Sheila had not only stolen from her mother in the past, or department stores and boutiques, but she'd even stolen from close friends, for it gave her a head rush of adrenaline to cause chaos in her wake, rather like a sudden tidal wave that you never saw coming and were ill prepared for. On one occasion her friend was opening a few cans of chickpeas with a tin opener to make hummus to serve with pita bread and tzatziki for lunch that day. But when her back was turned, Sheila had surreptitiously slipped the can opener straight into her purse and had got a kick at seeing her friend's bemusement in looking everywhere for the tin opener. It was right here! The tin opener was right here! I was opening these cans, wasn't I? So where has my tin opener got to? Where the hell is it? Well, I saw you opening the cans myself with the tin opener. But I honestly didn't notice where you put it, Sheila said. Sheila's friend had sauntered around the kitchen, looking in every nook and cranny for the can opener, while Sheila was inwardly enjoying a big chuckle to herself on her friend's account. She knew it was naughty of her to do this, but she couldn't help herself. She loved ruffling up people's feathers and making them feel as if they were completely losing the plot. Sheila had helped her friend look everywhere for the tin opener, but it was nowhere to be found, because of course it was discreetly tucked away in Sheila's purse. She enjoyed the frustrated pandemonium she invariably caused when things went missing, but her friend had not suspected for a single moment that Sheila's slippery fingers were responsible for pinching the tin opener, where it was laid to rest and left to gather dust in a box in a closet in Sheila's daughter's playroom, for everything Sheila took was of no earthly interest to her at all, and sometimes she had fun by returning the item and putting it in a bizarre place, like she'd done growing up as a girl. A year later she had returned her friend's tin opener, and on a phone call her friend had told her that she had uncovered the tin opener in a bizarre place. "Do you remember when my tin opener went missing?" she had told Sheila. "Well, you won't believe it. I found it, after an entire year has gone by. I can't believe it. I found it in the laundry basket, would you believe?" "Well, isn't that strange?" Sheila had said. So there we are. That is the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.